Good afternoon. Can you all hear me clearly? Yes. That's great. My children have said they've always heard me clearly. That usually means I shout. A great pleasure to be here. I always enjoy coming back to my homeland, although I consider myself a POM-Oz, which is a hybrid these days. But it's really lovely to come back and have a chance to be amongst, a culture that I'm very familiar with, and also to have the pleasure to speak here. And I do thank the organisers, Anthony and the crew, for a wonderful effort with this. I think they've done an amazing job, and I would certainly like to thank them for that. Unfortunately, the last time I was due to speak here was when Graham Birdsall sadly died just a week before the conference, and I think he set up an amazing tradition, and I have got a wonderful feeling that Anthony and his crew are going to do a similar thing, and I hope that you'll always support them, because I think, I know what it's like to set up something like this, and I think they've done an incredible job with that, so I would like to thank them for that. Thank you. Well, today, what am I going to talk about? Well, I'm going to talk about what has been my research of 1,600 cases so far, and what I believe is happening, at least from my limited perspective, because I think anybody who thinks they've got a mandate on this is fooling themselves, because we literally are seeing this through a little tiny window, and all of us have got bits of the puzzle, so I think if we honour each other's research, we may get a better sense of what's going on. Remember that we are only seeing a very small percentage of those that are prepared to look at this within their own experience. So with that in mind, I can only give you thoughts and feelings, or perhaps a tentative hypothesis of what may or may not be part of what's happening to this planet and our interaction with these cosmic advanced intelligences. So I'm starting off with what I call the star children. Now, I believe that over the last 60, 70, maybe 80 years, there's been an acceleration of our development in terms of our evolution. And my sense is probably because these advanced intelligences are seeing what we're up to down here, and it's almost like what is going on is that they've got a 3-year-old with a loaded gun, and they're trying to say, oh my goodness, we've got to wake these lot up very fast. Otherwise, they're not only going to destroy themselves, they're going to destroy the rest of us, or at least interact with us, and we're not ready for that kind of primitive behaviour. So, let's start off. The reason I've put this down is because for me, what I've had to do as someone who came from a very, very third-dimensional scientific paradigm. I was a nurse and midwife 30 years ago. In fact, if you told me 30 years ago that I would be travelling the world speaking about aliens and UFOs, I'd have probably sent you to the nearest psychiatrist and said, Prozac's really good. The bottom line is that 30 years later, here am I doing this, and it's been an interesting journey, which I think has been very much echoed in the clients that have come to me. I've had to remove everything that I could possibly think of I thought was true and re-examine it. And I've had to re-examine it with this whole hypothesis in mind. And it's been amazing how it's all fitted together in such a better way than it did when I was educated into the third-dimensional belief system. So I do sit down before fact, and I keep my mind open because I don't know what's impossible, and I don't know what I don't know. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Tracy Taylor. Some of you may be aware of her. I just want you to hear a little bit about how she speaks about her understanding of her experiences.
My name is Tracy Taylor, and I'd like to share with you some of my experiences and some of the drawings that I have been doing that have come from my experiences with extraterrestrials. Since I was a very young child, about the age of 2 or 3, I remember having experiences with beings that were definitely not human, and most of those experiences have actually been very positive. It was quite normal for me as a child to have these experiences, and I thought that everyone else was having the same experiences until I grew up and became a teenager and realised that it was quite unusual, and I didn't find anyone else to be having these type of experiences and being taken up onto strange craft and flying around the place. It's been quite a journey, and through my teenage years it was very difficult to relate to other people of my age. I, at the age of 15, found that I had healing abilities, and this came from learning from my experiences with these ETs, how to do this using my hands, and that was very natural to me. My family, though, really didn't have much of an idea about this sort of thing, and even though they've been very, very supportive through this, of course they really didn't know how to take my idea of being able to heal with my hands. Up until about the age of 17, I had these abilities and psychic abilities, which I did end up repressing quite a bit because I thought I was going crazy. And I went to seek professional help. I went to psychologists and psychiatrists and had head scans and CAT scans, ECGs done, and obviously nothing was found. But more recently, over the past 3 years, I've been finding myself doing geometric type drawings that seem to come to me through these experiences, and I find I have this urge to draw, and I sit down and my hand seems to just take over, and when I try to have conscious input into what I'm doing, it doesn't seem to work. My hand stops, so I usually need to be sidetracked by watching TV or talking to someone or being on the phone, and these geometric designs come through. I did a series of about 8 black and white ones, which after I completed them, I was told during a dream to put them onto transparency paper and that they'd fit together. And I thought, okay, well, I'll go and do that. And I actually met Mary Rodwell, which was a lifesaver, and went to a support group meeting with some other experiences, and they all sat down and put them together in a way that I hadn't tried before. I'll be showing you these and show you how they fit together. I'll now walk you through the drawings and explain to you some of the symbology and some of the explanations that have come through within me about what they mean. The black and white ones that fit together, I ultimately hope to have them put onto computer in 3D, as I've been told that it'll explain a little more about what they actually mean.
I'm not going to show you the drawings right now. There is a DVD that I've done which is called Expressions of ET Contact, a visual blueprint, where Tracy explains this. But what I wanted to show you was that for Tracy it was normal to be aware that she was on a spacecraft at 5. She soon learnt not to talk about it at school for obvious reasons. The fact that she found that she had healing abilities when she was 15. Now Tracy was quite amazing in the fact that she put herself through the psychiatric what would you call it, scheme of things. And what they found was that there was nothing psychologically wrong. She actually faced a panel of 8 psychiatrists in Melbourne, and she held nothing back. She told them of the beings that she saw, she showed them the drawings that she did, and her experiences. And fascinatingly, not one of those psychiatrists said that they thought that she was in any way mentally ill. In fact, they wished her luck. What they made of it is obviously something that is personal to them. So what Tracy says, and what a lot of my clients are telling me, and that's even here I found some people telling me about the strange drawings that they did, which they download unconsciously but are managing to reproduce. This is what she says about what she feels is happening on this planet. There's a race of beings upon the planet increasing in number, although visually and physically indistinguishable to most humans. They are the bringers of the new, the bringers of light. They're here to guide the awakening of terrestrial consciousness. Now, what I wanted to know was, where is the evidence? Because that sounds wonderful, and I do believe that this is what's going on. But we need to look at the evidence. She also talks about the fact that the DNA of the star kid has 10-fold the amount of information. So we have to look at that, and we have to say, well, where again is the evidence of that? Many of those that would see themselves as star kids or indigos, crystals, golden children, children of light. The metaphysical community has many names for these different types of children being born now. And even ordinary grandparents, if I speak to the Rotary or I'm talking at a library, will say the grandparents will notice that their grandchildren are different somehow, even although they can't quantify it. So this is something that's been noticed in mainstream. I meet teachers that tell me the children are different now. So what is the evidence? First of all, what I have discovered is that it's global. And in the Himalayas, there's evidence of children there that show strange behaviour. Children using unknown sign languages. Children who draw pictures of triangular objects flying in the sky. And that they communicate with telepathy with unseen ETs. So this is in the Himalayas. We have in Mexico similar kind of story. Mexican children that also manifest similar behaviour. Many in the area reporting a long time UFO sightings, young children, extra agile, this is how it was written, and very talented. Their problem-solving skills have increased. They're much more disciplined, continually using strange sign language among themselves. And in Mexico City alone, 1,000 children have been identified who are able to see with various parts of their bodies. And I actually saw on a DVD a young lady of 17. And not only could she, when she was blindfolded, actually describe with her hand, scanning the photograph, what was on the photograph, but when they put a newspaper under her feet, she could read the headlines through her shoes. So it seems like we've got abilities that we are only just tapping into. What's fascinating also in China, there's been discovered that there are a lot of children in China with similar abilities. And Paul Dong calls these China's super psychics. And they are also showing amazing psychic and intuitive abilities. They have the ability to open flower buds with thought alone, display telekinetic abilities as well as other fascinating multidimensional skills such as sensing others' thoughts. Being reported that the Chinese government has observed these children changing the human DNA molecule in a petri dish before cameras and scientific equipment to record this supposedly impossible feat. There are many, many other things that they actually have been able to identify, and these children are now being fostered and being encouraged throughout China. So, what do the Star Kids themselves tell me? That not only do they have memories of being on spacecraft and being educated, they often have past life memories, including ones where they are not human. Information they have not consciously learnt seems to be downloaded in many different ways, and I'm going to talk about the downloads in a minute. They have a sense of purpose, a sense of mission. They feel, excuse the pun, alienated on this planet. They find other human beings actually quite barbaric. And they'll say to me, I can't understand how we operate on this planet. It seems really, really primitive. And they are very intelligent and intuitively creative. So what other evidence do we have that we are changing as a species? Dr. Atwater talks about the extreme jump in intelligence between 24 to 26 points, and now concerns non-verbal intelligence, the ability to know and intuit information in the area of genius, once ranked scores between 134 and 136, a preponderance of today's youth test between 150 and 160, many over 184. No precedent explains this. And if you are interested in the prophecies, in fact, Edgar Cayce, may be well known to a number of you, actually talked about something called the fifth root race that would manifest on this planet around the year 2000. So I'm looking at it from a number of levels to see if we can actually qualify this material. Dr. Roger Lear may be well known to some of you. He wrote the book The Aliens and the Scalpel. He's taken out at least 15 implants from different individuals now, which has been fully recorded, and the information on these implants on double blind shows anomalies that cannot be explained. For example, there is no rejection by the body of these implants. They're highly magnetized, and there are many other components to these implants that cannot be explained. What he also has done, which a lot of people don't know about, is looked at the evidence for these star children. And he gave me one of his many, many statistics here. And this is just one to demonstrate a little bit more how we may have evidence that we are now changing as a species. The age of gait, saying simple words, repeating simple sentences, complex sentences, developmental changes in children between 1947 in America and 1987 alone. And if you look at the statistics, the increase in 1987 from 1947 on some levels is as much as 83% acceleration. We've got 60, 66% and what have you if you look to the right of the table here. And what Dr. Lear is talking about is really quite fascinating. He's actually saying that he believes this is not due to better prenatal care, that he believes it's part of a very active interaction with alien acceleration of our evolution through alien intervention in our bodies and minds. So Tracy Taylor. Many of these children born these days have memories intact from their previous existence on board craft as extraterrestrials. They're kept on track by continuing their interaction with their cosmic family while they're in human form. Now, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more and what people have not only conscious memory of, and this is very, very important, that 80% of this is conscious memory. A lot of people think the only way we get this information is through hypnosis, and this is conscious memory. We get a lot more detail through hypnosis, although I will actually quote Dr. John Mack, which some of you may be interested and know of, who was the professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, who wrote the book Abduction and Passport to the Cosmos. And in it he said, actually, he believes that the information through hypnosis is far more accurate than conscious memory. And his reasoning for that is that the subconscious does not edit the information that our conscious mind edits. So we are more likely to get the truth, believe it or not, through regression hypnosis than we do through conscious memory, which goes contrary to many other people's information on that. And I find that fascinating, and I actually agree with him. Okay, so this is a 5-year-old statement that the mother came to me about not only her own experiences, but her 5-year-old son. And he said one day to her, I don't mind going through the walls, and I learn more on the ships than I do at school. This is a 5-year-old child, and I'm going to tell you some stories about the children, because I believe the children are really giving us a very accurate understanding of their experiences, because they don't watch talk shows. These are how they understand them. And this is an experience of a young man who drew this, Mr. Finch, who actually, this was his experience, the balls of light and the ET coming through the wall. And this is what this 5-year-old continued to say. They only come at night. They float, not walk, and become invisible. And there are blue ones too, like the ones I've seen in my mind's eye. We're still talking about a 5-year-old child here. And this is quite fascinating because, again, this isn't what they see on TV with the Teletubbies, although I'm going to go to that in a minute. This is a very interesting account by a social worker's daughter. And she did think she was going crazy when one day she was looking in her lounge room and she saw 3 insect-like beings there. And she just had a daughter and she thought, well, I'm a social worker, I know this is crazy. Until somebody knocked on the door. And it was a friend of hers, and she came in. And, she was very pleased to see her because she really thought she was going crazy. And this woman said to her, do you realize that you've got 3 strange beings in your lounge room? And she said, you can see them too? This is her daughter. This picture was in her daughter's bedroom one morning. And the little girl, she was just over 2, and she said, Mummy, I had a visitor in my room last night. And she took me up and up somewhere, and she gave me something to eat. And the mother said to her, but who did the drawing? And she said, oh, that was the lady. Now, if you look here, you've got an archetypal being. Now, that's quite interesting, and the paranormal side to this can be very confronting to a lot of people, because obviously her daughter only did scribble drawings. So how it got there is quite fascinating. And I'm going to talk about how I believe these advanced intelligences are trying to wake us up. This is what a young lady of 8 said to her mum about what is known as knowledge bombs, or downloading of complex information that many experiencers tell me they have when they have encounters. And she explained it like this. Sometimes I get a headache. My head's so small. I can't always take it in so quickly. It's like knowledge bombs are being dropped on my head, which is a very interesting way to explain what she was experiencing. And another young lady, this was a 5-year-old girl talking to her mother about the fact that her mother found it quite strange that the baby, her little sister, wasn't hungry in the morning, which she normally was. And the older sister, who was only 5, said they'd been taken up into a spaceship. And she said they're like giant Teletubbies, and they sit cross-legged and meditate. They take the baby too and they feed her. Now, whether or not they actually look like Teletubbies, or whether or not they're using, as they do, like screen memories, an image that the child is familiar with so that they're not frightened. But what was fascinating was that she was talking about sitting cross-legged and meditate. What child of 5 talks like that? This is a drawing done by a 4-year-old child, and the mother came up to me and said, this is one of the drawings my son's done, and he said, Mummy, this is the man that comes and gets me. And as you can see, there's no ears, there's no hair, there's no mouth, there's no nose. And he's actually tried to draw a few more. This is drawn by a 4-year-old, and there you can see a triangular craft. And he said he's even done a side view. Now, we're talking about a 4-year-old child here. And what's fascinating is he's done an energy field. And what child knows about an energy field around a craft? And he said the energy field was to stop the people from going in and out. In other words, his interpretation was it was to keep them there. Now, this is a very interesting story in the sense that the lady had had a lot of experiences and encounters. And she said that her daughter was only barely 18 months old, and she went to the bookcase. And of all the books in the bookcase, there was only one she took out, and it was this one. And she said, Mummy, in her little toddler voice, Clowny comes and gets me. And Clowny, the screen memory for the ET, and she pointed to the face, comes and gets me. Bianca later, when she was a little bit older, actually drew Clowny. And this is the craft that she said she goes on. She even pointed to the window that she looks out of. And the craft, which is the green one, where she goes up to the main craft, or the mother craft. And this is what she says about Clowny. Clowny sometimes takes me in his spacecraft. The colours are grey and black. I get there because Clowny flies, not with wings, he floats. Clowny's energy field. Clowny used to scare me, but my mum and dad said he's my friend. I thought Clowny was stealing me, but he was healing me. Clowny said he would protect everyone in the family. And Clowny's colours are white, yellow, red, pink and blue. Clowny's like a friend to me and takes me away at night sometimes. It's not very often anymore. He used to take me a lot when I was little, but I think it's because I've seen everything up there already. This is another picture of Clowny. Sorry about the blue background. But again, she's actually saying a little bit more about Clowny. Her brother also sees Clowny. And he's slightly younger, and his mother also told me that Clowny sees angels as well. And this, again, you can see that they've got little wobbly legs, which looks as though the being is floating, and 3 digits. A similar kind of thing. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit more about the paranormal side of this, because this is part of it, and many people experience this. Things go missing and then they find them again. Taps or electronics turn on and off. The electrical field of the experiencer seems to be one that does seem to affect a lot of the electronic equipment. But this was particularly interesting, and I'm going to give you a chance to just think about it for yourself. This particular book was taken up to bed every night by that 5-year-old little boy where you saw the pictures. And he used to, as his mother say, scan the book with his hand. And he used to then, the next night, give it to his sister to take up to bed. And the mother had no idea why he would do that. But what really confronted her was not the fact that he scanned each page with his hand, was the fact that one morning both children came down with the book. How did that happen? Well, I usually throw that back to the star kids themselves, and I actually talked to a young man who was 17 years old, and I said, would you have any explanation of this? Because for me, this is quite confronting. And he said this, and I'm going to throw it out to you, make of it what you will. He says this: the child reading the book with his hand was scanning the pages with his palm. The palm of the hand is a strong energy channel, known as a minor chakra. So both scanning this way, the child was reading the energy signature, not the words. He could pick up the essence of the story through the author's emotions and moods at the time of creating the words. He could still enjoy and to some extent understand the story in this way, but through an emotional journey rather than allowing the words to stimulate the imagination as most mortals do. As for reproducing the same book, well, that's easy. We can manipulate time, as time in a linear sense just doesn't exist. It's a human invention to separate events and to make sure you conform to what is expected in your lives. All the child did was go backwards, through time if you like, and bring the same book back to the present with him. So the sister had the same book literally. Now, this is a 17-year-old young man. You can make of that whatever you wish, but I found it quite fascinating because I'm going to talk about what's taught on the craft, and one of them is about time. This is a drawing of a 10-year-old girl. This being came into her bedroom. She was very, very frightened at the time. But you notice it's got a flat head. And again, no nose and no mouth. But what was interesting, a 13-year-old girl drew some with flat heads as well as the egg-shaped heads, which again is just showing you how in different parts of the world they correlate. Now, this is a particularly interesting story because it's two brothers. One was 11 and one was 13. And this lady wrote to me from Vancouver. And what she told me was that the next morning, both her sons talked about a spacecraft being above the house the night before and taking them on that spacecraft. Now, this is two children saying the same thing. The younger child was actually talking about this strange being. He was in an auditorium, which you can see there, with other children in pyjamas, and he's talking about being taught things. And he said the lady looked unemotional. She had no ears, no eyebrows. The nose was just slits. There were no fingernails, and her face had no expression. And he said that he didn't feel particularly frightened, but he was being taught something. The brother, however, said that he also saw beings there, and this long implement that he's holding was actually nothing to do with a weapon, but was something he said was like an anesthetic. He felt these beings were like scientists and they were curious about us. And he was told it was something to do with genetics. And this is a 13-year-old child talking like this. And this is what she said. He felt the devices were more like tranquilizers than for killing. And she said, the older boy felt uncomfortable remembering the details, the same as his brother. They both remember a light in their bedroom. And the older brother remembers the little one being upset. If I have to go on the spaceship, then I'm bringing my teddy. And his older brother was helping him find it because he knew they didn't have much time. Now, you have to ask yourself, when you get such detail, is this really a fantasy? And the fact that they were both describing similar things. She's also a lady who's had experiences. She often sees UFOs, as you can see one just to the right of your screen. And also orbs seem to be around her children quite a bit. And that's something else that seems to be part of this as well. So, let's have a little bit more of a look on what this is all about. With the orbs, by the way, I'll tell you something that I mention in another presentation. I'm finding that this seems to be relevant to the whole encounter experience. A young 15-year-old boy, actually someone I worked with here in Britain, when he was exploring an experience where some beings were visiting him, he was actually mentioning what the beings looked like, and then he said, there's two orbs of light here. And I said, so what are they? And he said, it's Grandad and Uncle Ted. And he said, they're here too. And I said, so that's what the orbs of light are? And he said, oh yes. He said, they're here so I won't be frightened. And interestingly, when the beings went back on the craft, so did the orbs of light go with him. And that will lead into some more information that I want to cover with you. So what Tracy is saying here, is that what's happening at the moment is something that will bring about a global awakening. It's happening already with the children born without programs. Now, one of the things that I understand through my research is our third dimensional paradigm is very limiting to us if we are to ever expand and grow in a multidimensional way. So what is happening is, I believe there are programs on this planet now that are in a way helping us to make that shift. And I'm going to probably create a bit of controversy here by saying that it's quite possible such things as ADHD, autism and Asperger's may be part of those programs. And the reason I'm saying that is that all those different, and we call them a dysfunction at the moment, seem to be able to be more multidimensionally aware. They're able to see a greater reality, and many of them have encounters, and many of them also, apart from seeing angelic beings, see these other beings. Now, there's a gentleman, Neil Gold, in Hong Kong, and Neil Gold's just written his own story, and in his manuscript he calls it Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind. And he has always said that he's experienced a greater reality through his so-called dysfunction, ADHD. So it is something that I am looking at. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying it's something that intrigues me, because interestingly, the ADHD child really struggles with our whole paradigm, in the sense that they struggle with even learning what we normally have to learn at school. They seem to be operating at a faster pace. But I'll go into that a little bit more if I have time. So the cosmic human. What do we know from the experiences themselves? They're highly intelligent. They perceive other realities. They see unusual beings and or strange orbs of light. They all have a sense of mission. They manifest healing abilities. And they have an urge, at least some of them, to write in strange symbols, strange artwork, or come out with a variety of really unusual languages, which they say feels more comfortable to them than their own native tongue. And they have a wonderful sense of euphoria when they speak them. And this has been quite fascinating to me, because if someone wants evidence that this is a reality, this is not something you manifest after a hallucination or a fantasy. This is a real, tangible way that people change after their experiences. Dr. Boylan talks about the star child of both human and extraterrestrial origin. And a lot of my research is indicating that not only are we a hybrid species, but some of us actually have a number of different kinds of DNA, not just human, not just potentially grey or zeta, but sometimes those called manta, which is the insect-like beings, and possibly many, many others. And that is what they're told on the craft, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more. Again, what evidence these children are about. There are many all over the world, and one of them that's been researched a little bit on Project Camelot, for any of you that want to know a little bit more about the whistleblower material. The Camelot team went to Russia and met Boriska. And he was, it was interesting because he came to my attention because this young man still had memories as a child of actually being born on Mars. And he talked about visiting the Earth. And he talked about Lemuria. And this is some of the things that he talks about. He actually said that that Lemuria existed 800,000 years ago. They were 9 meters tall. He stated that people will find knowledge under the pyramids. And he said also life will change once the Sphinx is opened, and that the opening mechanism is behind its ear. He also talked about the Martian civilization, megalithic cities, and spaceships and flights to various planets, as well as Earth. He had an amazing understanding of cosmology. He talked about the gifted kids, and they were called indigo. He said he knew of them, and something was going to happen on Earth. They are of great importance, and they will be able to help people. He also was an amazingly advanced child. He could hold his head up in 15 days, spoke his first word at 4 months. At the age of 7 months, constructed his first sentence. He had exceptional memory and not only talked about Mars, but planetary systems and distant civilizations, which is absolutely fascinating. And 2 little anecdotes I will tell you is a 5-year-old child in Australia. His mother was talking about the pyramids, and he got very angry with her when she said that slaves pulled all the stones and built them to make the pyramids. And he said, "No, Mummy," he says, "you've got it all wrong. You don't know, because I was there." And he said they changed the density structure of objects large and small, and they levitated the stones into place, and they placed a crystal on the top to communicate with other worlds, and there's information in the Sphinx, but they haven't found it yet. We're talking of a 5-year-old child saying that. 5. And then I went to Adelaide about a year and a half later hearing this, and I met a lady there in her 70s, and in the 1950s when she was on her farm, she told me that this strange structure she saw outside her farm, and she thought the Shire had built it overnight because it looked so strange. She stood underneath and immediately found herself in a spacecraft with blonde-haired beings with blue eyes. And from that time onwards, they actually spoke and taught her many, many things. And she'd never spoken about this ever in her life before until she came to this conference in Adelaide. And she said, "Mary, they told me about the pyramids." Now, she hadn't heard my presentation. And she said, she said they levitated those stones into place. She said, and it wasn't who they thought, we think it was. And she said, and they placed a giant crystal on the top, which communicated with other worlds. And I'm just thinking, hold on a minute, there's a bit of deja vu here. And then, so I actually showed her what this little boy had said. And she said, "But what about the spaceship?" And I said, "What spaceship?" She said, "The spaceship under the pyramids." I have no idea if she's right, but isn't it interesting? Dolores Cannon does a lot of similar work to me. She's written many, many different books, 14 in total now. And she gets, through her regressions, a lot of information that confirms what I'm finding in my regressions. And this is all to do with expanded DNA. And I think we have to look at every avenue of information to see if we can qualify it in whatever way we can. And this is what she's found in some different people. I'm giving you about 3 different bits of information from different clients that she had. One of them said this: "DNA has been expanded to 12. We will have lighter bodies, eat less, more liquids, and have difficulty processing heavy, dense foods. There'll be immunity to disease and increased mental powers." Another one: "Tens of thousands of people are affected. It's when humankind reaches critical mass. The 100th monkey syndrome will become a reality, and this higher consciousness will affect others on the planet." Then another one: "There's been upgradings done. The human brain's upgraded too. The genetics are changing. There's more capacity. It's different wiring. It's different configuration." And another client: "Several have, she said, have unexpectedly gone to somewhere else into a past life, and it's not Earth. Some of them are emotionally considering it home. And often it's a hostile environment. It's hard to explain," she said, "why they would have such a powerful and emotional connection to a desolate alien planet instead of their Earth home. Even though they don't know where home is, they have this longing to go home." And I bet there's some people in this room that know exactly what I'm talking about. I call these people star children, and I have discovered them all over the world. Now, Dolores Cannon is very well known. She's gone to so many different countries and has her books translated in 28 languages now. So, and worked for 40 years gathering this information. Many, many letters I get, and this is just one example. "I'm in my 40s. I started walking at 8 months, talked in sentences by 10 months, knew how to read at 2 years old. No one taught me. I attended school at night. I had friends who walked through walls, became invisible, and we spoke telepathically. I desperately wanted to go home." Now, a young man who's now in his 30s told me many things he could do as a child. And what he says about his experiences now is this: "Remembering what I did before is like remembering a dream. It does not mean it's not real. It means that the mechanical thought processes lie outside my now normal conscious thinking. It lies on the outer ridges of the mind. You just have to find the edges and go further." And this is what he told me. I'm picking out a number that you might find interesting. He said, "I could take hard-boiled eggs from boiling water with my bare hands." There's a young man in the UK, that Anne Andrews' son, who told me he could do exactly the same thing, Jason. I had a lady when I was speaking in Western Australia in her 60s, when I was talking to a group there, came up to me silently afterwards and said, "You know, Mary, I could do that." She's in her 60s now. I could turn out streetlights with my mind. I would have telepathic conversations with my sister until she told me to stop being lazy and start talking. This is so common. This is so common. The parents that have said to me how freaky it is that their child picks up on their thoughts. And one lady said to me, you know, I would be thinking, oh, I'll give him baked beans for lunch. And before I say anything, he'll say, "Yes, baked beans will be fine, Mum." It can be very confronting. And I'll tell you, those that are teachers here, watch out, because a lot of these star kids can read your minds. And I remember a 13-year-old girl telling me, and she said, "It's really awkward, Mary," she said, "because I know what my teacher's thinking. And what she's thinking and what she's saying are two different things. And sometimes what she's thinking isn't very nice. So watch your thoughts." Traits of a star child. And I'm going very quickly here because I'm trying to give you a big overview here. They seem to... it appears that they may well have superior mental and analytical capabilities. They have a direct connection to higher awareness, extreme sensitivity to thought and emotion, enhanced DNA, photographic memories, fast motor neuron responses. They know how to manipulate time and space, which is taught on the craft, and I'm going to talk a bit about that in a minute. And they are very good at non-verbal communication. And I'm going to go and give you some evidence, because you're probably thinking, oh, well, this sounds all very wonderful, but where's the evidence? But first of all, I want to, for those of you that are having experiences, and I am not in any way denying how difficult this is and how traumatic many have, the trauma that many have initially when they realise that they're being visited. And I'm in no way minimising that. But what I will say is that often the fear is the fear of not knowing, or the fear of something that may have happened, and what you think happened may not have happened in quite the way that you believe it has happened. And it is part of this process. And I would like to just say that down the track, a little bit about why I think that's going on. But Tracy Taylor, who I've mentioned before, and you've heard a little bit from her, this is how she actually talks about this. And I think it's very, very important for you to hear what she has to say. She says, "As far as my own contact experiences, I became very compassionate towards ET beings, as there's so much that humans can learn and benefit from interacting with them. I was fearful of my experiences only when I realised that I seemed to be the only one having them. I didn't know what was going on or why, but there's always been an equal exchange. I helped them achieve their genetic goals, and in return, my healing and psychic ability, plus my understanding of life on Earth and so on, has been enhanced. They also protect me when I ask them to. Basically, at the start, I misunderstood the Greys. The knowing ET part of me initially made a decision to assist them, and the understanding of this can be overshadowed by fear, which stems from our limited human perceptions and reactions to those experiences." So we're now going to go into what I call the secret school. Now, Whitley Strieber, all of you will be familiar with, I suspect, in this room, who wrote Communion and many others, Transformation, of his own experiences. And one of the books he wrote that he really had a difficult time with was the book called The Secret School, where he recalled ultimately being taken as a young child at night to a certain place in where he used to live as a little American boy, and being taught things. Now, there was a lot of problems with researchers about this because it all sounded a little bit too beyond... Oh, it's going to start. I'm going to stop that, sorry, before I get there. Now, Whitley Strieber, before I get to this, he wrote about his secret school experiences as he recalled them. And he said, I'd certainly been there at midnights in my childhood. And he talked about what he was being taught. Now, this is a 9-year-old child we're talking about here. And he said this, remembering the journey outside of time, he said there were 9 lessons. And remembering the journey outside of time was another step. I recall that the school had a definite structure, and there had been 9 lessons each summer that I attended. The 9 lessons involved the manipulation of time, because learning how to use time as a tool is the key to reaching higher consciousness and a real relationship with the beings. or parts of ourselves who are already superconscious. The secret school is part of the process of revising reality, a clandestine meeting of minds struggling to restitch the fabric of the world. It's about getting free of time, about remembering ourselves in all our truth. So, I was really fascinated by this. So, do my clients have this experience? Well, there's a gentleman who, you're hearing my voice because he remains anonymous, but this is his memory of being taken to a place in London where he had a similar experience of being taught and gone missing.
My very first memory was when I was attending primary school in the East End of London. I remember it was in daylight hours after school finished, in the long summer evenings and weekends. I would get this impulse to play with special friends and go to a special spot at the back of the school. I went back to this spot later and knew exactly where it was, and when I saw it again it was uncanny. It was obviously something about this spot. When I went there were other children, but not those I went to school with. I have missing time from that period, for whatever happened was screened out. We'd all meet at this spot and go off somewhere. There was no fear, but an incredible sense of adventure. And then I'd find myself back at home. I can remember Mum wondering where I was and becoming quite concerned. I'd basically gone missing. But I had no sense of anxiety at all. It was like, what's the problem, Mum? I'm here. As I got older, in my 7th or 8th year, I had clear memories of silhouette beings coming into my room at night. Even the shape of the being's head, it's weird. And when the film E.T. came out, it was like, oh my God, I've seen that shaped head before. It was bizarre. Dwarf-like creatures, small silhouettes. And there was no fear. But having said that, as a child, I could never sleep with the light off. And definitely being afraid of passageways and elevators terrified me. And that was the same for Father Christmas. He terrified me. If we were in Oxford Street in London at Christmas time, Father Christmas was everywhere and it was so embarrassing. I would know when they were coming. I'd be laying down in bed and basically see little heads playfully pop up to play games with my feet. I used to lay my feet flat and they would duck under the bed, and this was all the while my parents were in the kitchen having a cup of cocoa. The closest they'd get to me is halfway along the bed and I would be out of it and fall asleep. Or maybe they knocked me out.
That's one experience he had with going to the secret school. Hold on. Okay, so this is what Whitley Strieber has said, and I've just mentioned it to you. He had identical kinds of experiences where he would, at night he would be taken. I have met many, many others that have said the same thing. Now let me explain what someone else said to me in Queensland, in fact. And this is what he wrote to me. This is a gentleman who also had recall of his secret school experiences. Your website came as a revelation to me. I had never before heard or read about anyone else having had alien classes as a child as I have had. This has been both a blessing and a curse all my life. I am now 37. I remember having been given physics classes at the age of 3 or 4 in a classroom of children of similar age to me. I remember the details well and have an avid interest in physics since then, though I'm not mathematically inclined, so have not known what to do with the information, and there's a lot of it. I used to feel I was just crazy, and did a year of physics science, amazing myself and my teacher and other students, many engineers and physicists, with the fact I could just answer any question. I had never studied, and in fact dropped out of school because I was so frustrated. So, what's the veracity of the material that they're taught? Is it credible? This lady here, Chris Hale, got in touch with me. And she has a BA Majors in Comparative Philosophy and Social Anthropology, a graduate diploma in education, and is currently undertaking a Masters in Educational Studies in the UWA, that's the University of Western Australia. Chris has got a cat with her, and behind her are some of the information she got from the light beings. I refer you back to the narrative I sent you on the light people, as to how I was taught multidimensional, non-linear methods of thinking. This is possible human to human and does happen, but of course the light people have far more expansive knowledge bank. I have had quite a deal of interest in it by people in the field of consciousness and learning to whom I have sent this piece. This is some of the material that she downloaded through a succession of dreams from the light beings. And I'll give you some more information. The 2 progressive sheets were done quite consciously with great flashes of insight. There are about 10 or so dreams. And I'm just thinking of John Searle a little bit here. During the period which directly overcame any problems that I had that I could not solve when I was awake. Most of the dreams entailed visual representation, one in particular. I was led by a light person who took me to a black hole to observe, with commentary, thought transfer from the light entity, the separation and potential restructuring of space-time instantaneously. She's got here finest viscosity of time in a constant smashing of the same due to infinite gravity, and how the potentiality of new universes exist in the core of a black hole. So, being someone who was able to do this, she actually got in touch with two very highly regarded professors. One was Professor Paul Davis, the Chair of Physics at Adelaide University, and Professor Brian Josephson of Cambridge University. And I'm only giving you a very brief overview of what they said. This is maths we will not see for hundreds of years due to the adimensional nature of the spin and lack of fixed parameters. But it actually went into a lot more detail with that. And as I don't really understand what I'm reading, I'll leave that one to you. But what was fascinating for me was, okay, so Tracy and many others say they did physics when they were a child. I wonder how much of it they actually understand or know in terms of physics today. So I asked Chris if I might send to Tracy, who was actually in England at the time, some of her drawings from the light beings on this, without saying anything about them, but what could she understand, because she used to tell me she had downloaded physics. And within 24 hours, I actually got a reply from Tracy, which was really great. And this is what she said in an overview. I looked at Chris's drawings briefly, but it seems that they're related to the understandings of beyond light travel, and also the connections between the inner world and macrocosm and microcosm, and how they're interrelated. Now, what's fascinating is what Chris responded to that. She said, she's absolutely spot on. Over 5 to 6 weeks I was taught about the viscosity of time and space continuums in my dreams. It's how the inner and outer connect and how we can dematerialize within overlapping continuums. Yes, it's beyond light travel. Good God, some of the best physicists in the world have looked at this and haven't realized what she has seen at a glance. So, what are some of the educational syllabus that I've isolated so far? And I am sure there is so much more. So they're taught quantum physics, new understandings of experiences of time, the connection to all things, new thought processes, understanding of the spatial geometry of thought, new expanded states of consciousness, out-of-body training, telekinesis, telepathy, mind melds, ecology, healing and working with energy, the true history of man's origins, time travel and teleportation. And one of the most fascinating recently is parenting classes. And I'm going to give you a quick overview because I think it's really important. These new children, it seems, need to be approached in a different kind of way than the way that we normally behave. And Susie Hansen, who I'm going to mention at the end of my presentation, talked about going on the craft with her son, him going in one direction, her going in another. And she was taken to a room with about 14 other parents. And what she was shown was an interaction she had with her eldest son, where literally it was like in real time they'd recorded this interaction, where she'd said something to her son and her behavior to him. And she said it was quite embarrassing. But then she said she was shown how her son perceived her behavior to him. And what they were saying was, with these children you have to do it differently because they see things differently. So you now have to behave in a different way. And every parent was shown an incident and then shown how they needed to behave from their child's perspective, which is fascinating. Gosh, I wish we had this here. Ultimately, though, the bottom line was then she actually got very, very teary because she said, now I know why I'm different with my eldest son to my younger son, because she'd felt very guilty about it. So that was quite fascinating. Hypercommunication. It should be borne in mind that the nature of extraterrestrial communications, that in a majority of instances star visitors communicate with humans by telepathic transfer of mental images and concepts rather than by words and speech. And this is really where we go into something I'm particularly interested in. Tracy explains it this way. Everything's made up of the same matter, resonating at different harmonics, so the ETs are able to communicate with us, directing thought on subatomic levels, and so activate the subconscious. These symbols are meant to communicate the nature of the macrocosm. And that's really quite fascinating.